In this session, we will learn about SATA hard disk drives and which cables and connectors are used for SATA drive connections inside your computer. If you have recently purchased a new computer or are working with a relatively new computer, then most likely it is using SATA connections. Here is an example of a 3000 GB SATA hard disk. We have different standards for SATA. One of the original versions was version 1.0. It ran at 1.5 gigabits per second. The second is SATA 2.0, which runs at 3.0 gigabits per second. The latest SATA standard 3.0 goes even faster, which runs at 6.0 gigabits per second. One of the advantages that SATA brings is that the connections are much smaller on the motherboard. You can see on this motherboard one of the older IDE or PATA connections, and this motherboard also has SATA connections. Fortunately, most new motherboards support both IDE and SATA interfaces. But before buying a new hard drive, I suggest you read your motherboard manual and see which port it supports. If we look at the cables used for SATA and PATA connections, we will really see the difference. PATA uses these larger ribbon connections, and here are the SATA connections. They are much smaller connectors on the motherboard and a much smaller cable connecting towards the storage device. So for the purpose of managing cables inside your cabinet and making sure that the airflow is maintained through the computer, SATA has some distinct advantages. This is the back of the SATA drive. It is very similar to the PATA drive, in the sense that all the interfaces are on the back of a SATA drive as well. The smaller interface is for the data connection. The larger interface is actually for the power connection. There are also some jumpers on the drive. Then you have an older 4-pin Molex power connector. You could either plug in with the SATA power connector or the 4-pin Molex connector onto this drive. You need to choose either one of them. One of the advantages with SATA is its capability on a number of drives to do hot swapping. Hot swapping means that you could unplug this drive while your system is powered up. You could also plug another hard drive if needed. Of course, you should take the necessary precautions before doing this. If we look at the top of any SATA drive, it will have the documentation of the power on one side and the serial or data connection on the motherboard and the jumpers, the other side. If your power supply had one of the new SATA connections, you would simply plug the power connections into the SATA power and the hard disk would start.